Welcome to Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery, a conversation held at the intersection of substance abuse, mental health, and everyday living. Your hosts, Mark Regala and Justin Wolf, bring both professional expertise and personal understanding to the table. So welcome to the conversation. Let's dive in.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode here of Healing Minds, Stories of Recovery and Resiliency. I'm your host, Justin Wolf, joined as always by my co-host, and we have a guest today, Andrew Kama. So before we dive in to talk with our guest, who's going to share their story about recovery and what that journey has looked like for them, first, as always, Mark is here with our lovely weather update. Mark, how's it looking out there?
No weather update, Justin. This is a very exciting time of the year for the city of Chicago. We're playing playoff football.
Trying to say that's an uncommon thing here in Chicago, Mark?
Well, we just won our first playoff game for the first time since, 2006 or 2007, after the double doink in 2018? And we got a solid team this year, so heading into the middle of January here, playing playoff football at Soldier Field. It's going to be very, very exciting. Bear down, Chicago Bears. I would sing it, but I don't want to scare away all of our viewers.
I mean, I think you just leave them clamoring for more. I mean, I know that's where I'd be, personally. So,
now, I do have a question for you, though. So when you're watching the game, what's going to be your candy of choice watching the game, since we got so many comments in the last podcast about your love for jelly beans and candy corn and all this?
I don't understand why people are trying to relegate jelly beans to like a one time of the year kind of candy. I mean, anybody who's tried Starburst jelly beans knows these things are incredible and very delicious. I saw some comments in there about candy corn. I mean, candy corn gets a bad rap too. Let's just call it what it is. It's not that bad. I mean, it's just pure sugar with a lot of other additives that make it bright orange and brown and white, you know, all those natural sugar colors. But I think for the game you asked, Mark, it's great. It's got some lemon heads here.
There we go, lemon heads. You're not a lemon head,
Justin.
Justin.
Eat these and just know that inside with each one of these you eat, you're just like slowly dying. It's like, oh, the ab definition is not as pungent as it once was.
Oh, I like lemon heads back in the day. They're good.
Yeah, I know it is not a boneless, skinless chicken breast or a raw egg, so it is not making the cut today. So
not the new Mark, the old Mark.
Not the new Mark. Yeah, changed man.
Yep, exactly.
So Mark, I mean, I can't help but notice how shiny that shirt is that you're wearing tonight. My eyes just seem to be drawn to whatever shiny message you're carrying. And so
I'm wearing it for Andrew.
What does it say there?
Don't
put the camera there.
Yeah, it says strength and sobriety, courage and recovery. I'm wearing this for Andrew. I teach the MyCap class, or support group with Andrew. I've gotten to know him the last couple of years, helping facilitate that class on Saturday morning for NAMI, and hearing his story, and that's why we invited him on the podcast today. He is the symbolic of strength and courage.
Absolutely.
So, the symbol of strength and courage, excuse me.
100%. I think before we kind of dive into his story, Mark, what size shirt is that?
This is actually an extra large, Justin. I told you last podcast, I actually had a very good year in the weight room last year at the gym.
That's right. Yeah.
Those
gains are apparent, and everybody knows it. So until beach season, right? That's when you get to rock your pastels. You'll lose those dark colors. Mark will be sunshine and rainbows all day. Be beautiful. So
I don't know if I'm going to stray away from the dark colors. That's me.
Awesome. That's all I got to say.
It is.
All right. So, as always, it's fantastic. No, Mark, and I think it was a great thing. You kind of shared with me a little bit about Andrew, his story, and kind of the work that he does here. I mean, he's an RSS for NAMI, recovery support specialist. So really showing up as a peer to support people in their time of need. He's also a licensed social worker who really does some great work working with children as domestic violence counselor. and like you said, kind of like what you're facilitating there on Saturday mornings over here at NAMI. So I think, needless to say, kind of looking at the background and the history and kind of what Andrew brings to the table, it makes a fantastic guest kind of share and talk about, just what is, Andrew, that you've experienced and what is that you've had to overcome to get to where you are today. And so before we kind of dive into everything, man, if you could kind of share a little bit about your story, and I'll ask you everybody's favorite interview question. So tell me about yourself.
All right, yeah. Thanks, Justin. Skull. Sorry, I didn't mention that I'm not a Bears fan, but I will support the Bears through the next couple of weeks. So
Mark just told me to end this podcast, man. You better.
we won't say what team is your team of choice.
I just said. No, but support the Bears 100%. Go Bears. Yeah. So I've been struggling with my mental health probably since 6th, 7th grade. My mom has been a LCSW probably. That's what she went to school for. That's what she does for work. She kind of caught those warning signs and symptoms. I was isolating, just a lot of withdrawing from things, not being myself. And at the time, I will say my dad was not quite as on board as he is now with like the idea of like mental health support and stuff. I would say stigma played a large role in that, and I don't know where all that came from, honestly, but I know that my parents were kind of going through their own issues at the time as well. So my dad kind of made it very clear to me, or that's how I took it, that like therapy was a no. Like, don't do therapy, you can't do therapy. My mom knew that I would not go to see a therapist, so we had just moved to Naperville. And we were at Costco one day over the summer, and we were in the parking lot. And my mom got a call, and she got off the phone. She's like, "Okay, we're gonna go see a therapist now." And I was like, "Oh, no!" Like, so we just moved. I didn't even know how to walk home. Like, I had no choice. So I will say, like, that first taste of therapy was really off-putting. Like, I did not like it at all. I was 100% tricked to go there. So that was like not working for me. So continued to have to go see a therapist and stuff. Started self-harming sophomore year of high school. Started developing suicidal ideation senior year of high school, as well as a first suicide attempt. So I was in and out of the hospital for probably first 5 years after I graduated high school. I started at College of DuPage because my dad did not want to pay for me to like go to North Central College. I had been accepted there to study physical education, but my mental health was just not in a good spot. So, at the time I was really upset with him. But looking back, like, I'm really glad, because my first semester at COD, I medically withdrew from all 5 of my classes like 6 weeks in. So, in and out of the hospital, a lot of suicide attempts.
So slow down real quick, because I think you're sharing, like, that's a lot to kind of go through, right?
Yeah.
In this very compacted time, right? You're talking about like high school, like what happened there. Like, we just kind of wheel it back a little bit. Like,
yeah,
self-harm injury, like self-harm behavior starts showing up there, and the suicide attempt. Like, how, like, can you remember what it was like trying to navigate high school? Because I've seen just, when individuals engage in self-injury behavior, that sometimes, that can be seen by other students, and sometimes other students aren't the most kind and understanding or empathic to just the pain that somebody who's engaging that is going through at that time.
Yeah, 100%. I will say, I was already kind of like, I don't want to say like, just not one of the most appealing students, I guess is the nice way of saying it. Without saying like kind of like, I didn't have a lot of friends, honestly. I was in marching band, and I did play water polo in the spring. With that being said, like, again, kind of like, that outcast circle, I didn't have I had friends per se, but I couldn't identify like oh yeah, these people would like go to bat for me, you know. Um, so when the self harm started, it was a little difficult because it was actually one of my best friends who like told the I think she had told the one of the social workers at the school and kind of brought that or told somebody at the school and was brought to their attention, and he called my mom and I was all upset because my mom didn't know about it at the time. And I actually do remember that I at first I did lie and I said that because in our band hall we had like these big lockers, and I had lied and said like which I don't know why I thought this was even remotely believable, but I was like, yeah, I got scratched on my arm from like reaching in the band locker and trying to get my stuff out of the back. So
Right.
really bad lie. But I think that honestly, like the self harm, the depression, the hospitalizations. My sophomore year, I was hospitalized for 8 weeks in a partial hospitalization program. Then spent like 4 weeks in an intensive outpatient. Went back to school for I want to say like 2 or 3 weeks, and then went back to the program. And that was a program specifically for self harm. Um, but just like that being taken out of school,
Right.
you know, all that stuff was very disruptive. When I was already struggling, like I had very low self-esteem. I mean, didn't have a lot of friends. um it just wasn't a good mix, and it's hard because like, you know, you want to get those kids that support. And I think also, I mean, that was 2008-ish, 2009, you know, that was a totally different time.
Yeah. I mean, especially like, you talk about like that disruption from school. Like that's massive at that time where school is already a struggle and now you're being removed from that environment. Like what you said, it's almost like it added up to what like 12 weeks if my math is correct there.
Yeah,
Um,
pretty much.
and so to kind of be out of it for that long and then have to re-intervene, like that's a big ask for a young person.
You know, and I will say, like, sophomore, like, that was bad sophomore year. But then, like, senior year was honestly way worse because that was my first time being hospitalized inpatient. So that was even more of a disrupt. My first time hospitalized inpatient was actually over the summer going into my senior year of high school. So I think I was hospitalized like 3 or 4 times that summer alone. The whole summer I was either in the hospital, in a partial program, or in a half day program the whole summer. So which caused me to miss a lot of band camp because band like marching bands in the fall. So I was behind in the drill, didn't know the drill. That kind of like set up a lot of things for me. Um, I didn't have like the best rapport with our band director, and I will say that was kind of what led to my first suicide attempt because suicidal ideations. You know, I kind of thought, you know, I it was kind of in the back of my mind, but never really fully considered it. It was, you know, no kind of active thoughts or anything. One night after our practice, I still, I, and I, his defense, like I probably should have like reached out to some, like my, section, like chairperson and learned the drill that I was missing. But, we were like doing a run through of our show and I walked off the field like I was supposed to because I didn't know the rest. And he walked up behind me, and like said something in my ear, like, if you don't learn the rest of this drill by X, I think it was like the end of the week or something, like you're done, like you're not continuing. And it was very upsetting to me. It really freaked me out because like one, we already didn't really get along. He didn't really care for me. So we kind of, you know, he walked away. We had our end of practice, like, you know, we kind of meet as a band or whatever, dismissed. And I kind of like chased him down across the field and I was like yelling after him. I was like crying, like, and I honestly don't remember, but he was just like, you know, he was just not having it. And that's actually what led to my first suicide attempt. So, um, I was shortly hospitalized, like right after that again. So, band, honestly, like that kind of left like a bad taste in my mouth. And I kind of was definitely done with that after like my senior year of marching band. Didn't had no interest in doing band or any like even I was in curricular band like all through high school as well, but that just did not have interest in that anymore. I really honestly have always just really been very into water polo. I love water polo. I coach swim team now. Um, when I was hospitalized, more so continuing on through the year, water polos in the spring. I started like failing my classes because I'd been in the hospital so much. And it wasn't necessarily that I was failing because my grades were low, as I was missing assignments. I had zeros. I couldn't participate in water polo. And it was just like a really rough thing because that was what I loved to do. That was basically an outlet for me, a a, way to cope. And I couldn't even I couldn't play in the games. I wasn't allowed to, because I was ineligible. So it was just it was a really rough time. I will say also, I been put on a lot of psych meds. I gained a lot of weight. I went from sophomore year being, cause I was a goalie. So sophomore year, I was JV defensive player of the year. And I think I was pretty decent. I was JV defensive player of the year, scored a goal my sophomore year, which as a goalie is kind of a big deal. Senior year, I was
Across
being
the other side
benched.
of the pool? Yeah, no big deal.
Yeah, 25 meters. So I mean, that's pretty good. But my senior year, I was being benched. I was not starting. I was on varsity, and I was on varsity junior and senior year, but I wasn't playing. I remember senior night. My parents came. I did have I will say I did have some good support at my school. My school psychologist, she was awesome. She came to my senior night game, and I just remember feeling so incredibly embarrassed because I couldn't make these saves. It's one from being out of shape because I was not able to do things because of not being eligible. The medication, I was gaining a ton of weight. Misdiagnosed with bipolar at the time, so on a lot of bipolar medications that I weren't doing anything for me. So it was just a really terrible, terrible time. I actually ended up my senior year, the last 6 or 8 weeks of school, they actually ended up because I had a 504 plan, and they cut my schedule in half. So I actually only had to go to school periods 1 through 5, instead of 1 through 8, because I was just so far behind in so many things, and they were trying to make it easier for me to just be able to just graduate and be done. And I had enough credits and everything, so they just pretty much kept me in the English, PE, major classes, and then fifth period they changed around my whole schedule. Fifth period I had lunch, and that was solely just so because you have to be in school more than half a day to do a sport. So
just get you through, right? And
yeah,
I think that's obviously high school kind of presented those challenges, and you were kind of sharing then kind of transitioning into college and kind of what that looked like. So what did that part of your life kind of involve?
College was a very difficult time in the beginning too, because it was kind of unspoken in my family that at the minimum you're getting a master's degree. My parents are both. I know my mom's first generation, even college graduate, a bachelor's degree even. My dad, I want to say the same. I'm not sure, but both my parents have their master's degree. My dad talks about how the University of Chicago advisor messed him up and put him in 2 master's programs when he could have gotten a PhD. I don't know. So, my parents are both very, very well educated, and it was very clear, from the youngest I can remember, my parents always talked about how they had money going into savings for both my sister and I while we were growing up. So there was money for us. They put us in a great position, honestly. And I was very grateful for that. But with that being said, school, I just assumed I would always go to school. I never thought of anything else. So, I had been accepted to North Central College to study physical education, but my dad just did not really, he was not going to pay for that. And it was more just because he was afraid I was either going to get kicked out or drop out and not be able to return because of my mental health. I spent my first semester 6 weeks in at College of DuPage and medically withdrew because I'd been hospitalized twice. I want to say after 9 weeks into the semester, and I just could not catch up on those classes. It was really difficult. I will say, COD is already kind of a bit great school, a little bit of a challenge just because everyone's commuting, so you can't really form that core group. It was a difficult time, but I will say I think just because that's again just raised with this kind of sense of education is so important, that did become one of my core values, and I did push myself for the 6 years I was at COD. Every semester, whether it was spring, summer, even in fall, I was in at least one class. So after I withdrew from those first 5, my parents were like, yeah, we're not going to put you in another 5 to lose all that money again. So I think that spring semester was cut down to 4, and then I did take one class over the summer, and then it was just 1 or 2 classes until it got to the point where I was getting more stable to like transfer. But those 6 years at COD were really rough. Um, I I didn't know how to reach out for support, honestly. Continuing to self injure um, a lot of problematic behaviors. My parents were trying to support me to the best of their ability, and I was just really just draining them out. Um, I was living with my mom. My parents divorced my senior year of high school, which also was another kind of curveball that threw in a lot of complications. Um, but I was living with my mom after, and I was just really, she was doing her best to assist me, and I just was not helping myself. And she got to the point where she was just kind of like, she didn't kick me out. The way she says, like, my behaviors, led to me not being able to live with her anymore. So, um, it was rough, but it was kind of a wake up call. And honestly, I think, in my opinion, like that was kind of the first step I needed to kind of realize, okay, I can't keep doing the same old, same old, same old. Like that was kind of like my rock bottom almost. Um, it
Like
was,
that motivated you to do something different there. And I think as you're kind of talking and sharing here, you're kind of mentioning throughout, like, hey, like self-injury behavior is something that was there and that it was a behavior that was frequently engaged in. And
yes.
during especially these stressful times, could you talk a little bit about kind of how you've worked on changing that relationship with self-injury?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I say like I've been in recovery now for 5, 6 years, and there are still days that I have impulses to self harm. Those things don't go away. It's how you cope and deal with them. Um, I think that in the beginning, uh, and when I say that, I want to like pretty much like everything after high school, like those were frequent behaviors because I didn't think anything of it. I was not in the mindset to even like consider. I think that I saw myself as stuck, and I really only saw myself getting out, dying by suicide. Like I didn't see anything else, so I didn't really put in effort to really engage in those coping skills. I I can teach all the hospital groups, whether it's something they teach inpatient or outpatient. It wasn't doing anything for me. The first psychiatrist I had as an adult after like transitioning to an adult psychiatrist, it was a husband wife duo, and I saw the wife for the first appointment. She put me inpatient because of self harm. Like I was like, that's, and at the time I didn't know much about how all that works. And self harm is isn't that's just because you're hurting yourself does not mean you're trying to kill yourself. You do not need to be hospitalized for that. Um, it was really difficult. I engaged a lot in self harm while in the hospital, just because I wasn't willing to kind of just acknowledge that this was not working and I needed to change something because change was scary. I don't like change. It causes me a lot of anxiety. I don't like not knowing things. Um, Fear of like the unknown is a big one for me, and that just causes those self harm behaviors to kind of heighten and increase. And it really took a long time for me to kind of, you know, I would say that I would be using coping skills, right? Everyone says that coping skills, everyone knows what coping skills are. But if there's really a difference between engaging in a coping skill and using a coping skill. Like I could, if I'm gonna journal, let's say that was my coping skill, if I'm journaling and not, being mindful and present, like in what I'm doing, and all I'm thinking about is, yeah, I'm just doing this to like check a box off and say like, yeah, well, I tried journaling and it didn't work. So I'm still, and I self harmed, but I tried journaling. Like, what is that really doing? I another coping skill that I like a lot, it's like some kind of art. So like whether it's drawing or coloring. Again, if I'm just doing that just to, basically fill that requirements, is that really engaging in that is that using that coping skill, or is that just going through the motions?
Right, exactly. And I think that's where it's like, hey, am I actually applying this? Am I actually utilizing this way as intended to, or am I just kind of passive? My mind's already made up knowing, hey, this isn't going to work. What I'm going through and what I'm experiencing is already feeling too intense, and you're telling me just to breathe through this. I don't really see how that's going to counteract this urge and this impulse that feels like it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
And so I think that becomes a really big challenge because you're asking somebody to kind of let go of something that there's a really strong connection to, especially when we talk about the non-suicidal self-injury and saying you actually have to engage and do something different that maybe isn't going to be as immediate as that go-to behavior that you've been engaging in for quite some time. That's a big ask to ask of somebody.
Yeah, and it's while I was in the hospital, once I started, after I was on the adolescent unit, officially was on the adult unit and stuff. There one of the I think she was like a rec therapist, and she kind of worked on all the units, but she did do the chemical dependency group like 3 days a week on the adult unit. And I'd ask, like, I had a really good relationship with her from when on the adolescent unit. And she was like, "Yeah, you can attend the group," and it was it was, it made me realize that, it really is like an addictive trait, and it's something that you get that high off it, like that, you know, sometimes in those groups, like, depending on who all was in the hospital, there were sometimes people would be like, "Hey, you can't be in this group. You're not using substances. You can't be like," and it kind of challenged me, and I don't want to say like defended myself, but I helped educate them and say, like, addictive traits, it doesn't matter what your drug of choice is. You're doing something to fill that high, like how you're that dopamine rush, that to cope with that. I think that, kind of acknowledging that. I think that because at first I didn't realize that was so problematic, I want to say, like comparing that to a addictive trait that maybe gets more of a negative stigma, right? um I didn't realize that at first, so I think that kind of helped me kind of check that, like, hey, this is just as problematic as using a substance or gambling or addiction to pornography, whatever it is. That's just as problematic.
Absolutely.
Andrew, if I can interject for a second, when we talked about you being on the podcast, and I remember we were actually at MyCap actually talking about this, and and I made the comment to you about I don't have any history of self harm, and then I started reflecting about that comment that I made to you right before MyCap class started, and it's funny that you kind of you kind of tied everything together right there, because going into this podcast, I was actually thinking about this. I'm like, what the hell are you saying that you don't have any history of self harm? I mean, you were doing drugs recklessly and drinking recklessly. I mean, everything about my life was self harm. It was a different type of self harm, but it's interesting how you put it together there, saying it's an addictive trait and it's similar to any other form of addiction. Because I started putting the comparison together prior to this podcast, and I thinking back about what I said when we were talking about you coming on the podcast when we were teaching that MyCap class. So it's interesting that you did that. And then the other thing is going back to those first hospitalizations when you said it didn't work. Did it not work because you weren't willing to accept at that point? Was it the fear of change, was it the fear of trying, different coping things, or you just didn't want to try different coping things? Because I often talk about like my hospitalizations, and you've heard me say this when we speak to group. I made it so much more difficult than what it needed to be because I had a failure to accept and I had a failure to change. And if I would have just listened and applied earlier on, I could have saved myself from a lot of suffering. I mean, you look back at that, would you say the same thing is applicable to you? Or no?
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think I made it way, way more difficult than it needed to be. Um, I think part of it too, though, is I, I mean, because because of the way I was kind of like introduced to mental health professionals, I guess, it really tainted that view for me. I really did not trust mental health professionals at all. Even as low as a level as like school support. When I was in high school, actually, I guess in junior high, I could not stand the school social worker at my junior high school. Could not stand her. I refused to talk to her. Um, Even in high school social worker in high school, did not like him at all. And it was actually funny because I was actually thinking about him a couple months back when I got married, because I did not want to talk to him. So I ended up talking with the school psychologist. and she was super cool, and she was actually at my wedding. So she really helped me out, and I was thinking about. I wonder if she still talks to him. I was like, because he really wasn't that bad of a guy. I was like making him out to be this huge monster, and like thinking back now, I'm like, what did he really do that was also terrible? You know.
Yeah.
But I guess just because he was the school social worker, that put this stigma in my head, like, oh, he's terrible. I actually ended up like reaching out to my history teacher in my junior year of high school, and went to him for support because I didn't know who to go to. I was always going to like the wrong people, people who this wasn't like their specialty. He was great. He brought me down to, he kind of partnered me with the psychologist and stuff, and he was also at my wedding. But those were two key people, and kind of like honestly where I am today. Like they've seen me at my worst, and they've indirectly helped me get to where I am now. I think that's part of it too. I said kind of like going to the right people, that boundary component. I've struggled, like, I do have, so I did not mention this earlier, but I do have borderline personality disorder. So that's where that like misdiagnosis of bipolar, kind of, which makes sense. So I've struggled with boundaries my whole life. That has not been one. That's been
You
bad.
wouldn't call that a strength, is what you're saying.
Oh, 100%. Yeah,
Okay.
definitely not. That's probably like my top weakness. But honestly, the fact that I'm able to sit here and say that's
Yeah.
like a huge deal, because
Sure.
when I was going to those, we'll say non-professionals or non-mental health professionals in high school, I put my teacher in a position that I put him in a rough position. He wanted to help me, but at the same time, he has to. He's not a professional. Didn't go to school for this stuff, and he was. I feel like I really put him in a position where he was torn. How do I best help him? After graduating, he did, give me his cell phone and stuff, and I still didn't really have a great support system, and I kind of glommed onto him way too close, and he kind of got to the point where he was like, yeah, this is not going to work, and he said, we're done, like, we're not talking anymore. And it was very difficult. I've had that kind of history of like abandonment fears and stuff throughout my life, and that was a big one for me, and I felt like I lost a huge support. For a couple years, we did not talk. But again, like, I started to kind of fix things on my end, and we slowly rebuilt our relationship. And once he set that really firm boundary of like, hey, this is like, this is my limit, I'm done. I never tested that again, because I realized like he was not willing to cut that cord. It's honestly probably the best way to teach that lesson to me. It's kind of like that direct. I guess you could say like almost like exposure therapy.
Yeah, as you said, experiential exercise right there.
Yeah,
in real time. Like so.
Well, and I will say one of my other, I would say, biggest struggles, as far related to that boundary component is, so after I transitioned to that adult psychiatrist and stuff, worked with the two of them for, I don't know, like a year and a half. Ended up eventually transitioning to a different psychiatrist, and that was a really rough relationship for me. So I worked with him for 5.5 years maybe, and that boundary line was crossed very early on, and once it was crossed, there was no bringing that back in. And honestly, that caused a lot more harm, I think, in the long run than help. I didn't trust anyone, and he saw that, and he was trying to get me to trust him. But now, as a professional myself, I'm kind of like, I don't know if those were the most professional, ethical decisions he was making on his end. It ultimately got to the point where his boss was like, hey, so you can keep your job and stop seeing Andrew, or you can work with Andrew somewhere else and get a new job. That's kind of like the position that it ultimately got to. I mean, I was seeing him, oh gosh, 4 times a week, 30-minute appointments. I mean, come on, Justin, like, that's not something that happens, right?
Yeah. That is not.
No. So, just so, I mean, if you're inpatient, yeah, you probably see your doctor 5 times a week, but
Yeah.
what, 5-10 minutes, I was calling him outside of appointments, pretty much blowing up his phone. It was terrible. I felt terrible. It was a really difficult situation to be in because, at the beginning, yes, he was trying to help, but then he had no boundaries on his end either. And it really put me
Right.
in a really difficult situation because, I mean, that relationship was terminated June of like 2018. And still today, it caused it worsened my PTSD. It caused me a lot of trauma, honestly, because he was filling something that he couldn't,
Yeah.
um, it was just not healthy. And again, just kind of goes with that addictive, unhealthy behavior, trait kind of thing. I just it was my therapist that I have been working with now for quite some time. He says that was like I had to get that like fix from him. Like
Mhm.
that was like I needed a fix. Like talking to him, it was literally like filling that need. That I was it was very impulsive. If he didn't pick up or if he said like, "Hey, I can't talk right now," I kid you not, I probably called him a couple times, like 80 times in a row. It was bad. It was not good. It was not good.
Oh, so it sounds like you've had a lot of these experiences that you're kind of like, hey, if I'm going to be a good and effective helper, like I've got to kind of work on my own stuff. And I've had to kind of address this stuff. I had to like shine a light, knowing, hey, these personality styles and these ways that I relate with other people that I've seen kind of even come out in other people that are supposed to be helping me has really caused me even more harm and has not been helpful, even though the intention behind it may be very well intended, but the impact that's being received on the other end is not supportive and it's actually causing more harm. What have you kind of taken from your own personal experiences and your own reflection and kind of now really put into the practice that you do to really be an effective helper for those that are showing up in their time of need with really, a lot of emotional distress that they're kind of carrying into that room?
Yeah, I think that kind of like the two main things that I put in like to practice like today, with my clients. And I've mainly worked with youth adolescents. I worked a little bit like while I was in my master's program with adults in a psychiatric nursing home, but I really prefer to work with youth. So I think that age is there, you're very vulnerable, depending on what age you are. I mean, my youngest client right now is 5, so depending on where you are in that, you're learning, who to trust, who not to trust, how what you value, how you act. And I think that it's so vital that I demonstrate health. It's how do I say this? The boundaries that I implement, in my practices, in my professional practices, are so important because the experience that I went through, um, I don't want to be that person that like my doctor was to someone else.
Yeah.
Like I do not want to put someone through that. Again, like kind of like you said, like well intended, not initially off the bat. I don't think there was like intended harm, trying to do something wrong, and but it just kind of just got, like I said, once that line was passed, there was no reeling that back in.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be that person in someone else as a professional. So I really, when meeting with people, I keep that in mind. Like what, and it's almost like hyper in my head because it's affected me at a personal level. I was actually talking with a colleague tonight after work about like countertransference and stuff, and I told her, I was like, it's crazy because I feel like that kind of almost put almost like a positive countertransference in because it makes me think like this is something I don't want to do. So when I do, when I was working at the psychiatric nursing home, there was a client who really into acute borderline, and I saw so much of myself in her. And it wasn't like a countertransference, like, oh, like I feel this, it was almost like a, hey, I need to make sure I implement proper boundaries and do things that should have been done with me in hopes to help her now so she doesn't get to all these years of just terrible, stressing times that I feel like, kind of like Mark said, I made it way more complicated than it needed to be, right? I feel like I really dragged out all of this these practices that could have been implemented way sooner. You know, how many times do you need to go inpatient to learn these things? I mean, it's all about the willingness and wanting to do, and you have to do it yourself. You cannot put more work in than the clients. I think that's another thing I've really learned. You know, my psychiatrist was putting in all this effort to accommodate me, meet me where I was at. That really didn't work. And that's something I learned in school too. You know, you can't put more work in than your client is willing to put. You are doing the work for them and they're not going to learn anything. It's not going to benefit them. You know, like obviously, yes, aiding them and giving them the right tools and like, you know, teaching them those things. I think a lot of things I do is a lot of validation and empathy. You know, when working with children of domestic violence, like you have to be empathetic and validate them. You know, it's really hard. Um, and the other main component I will say is practicing my own mental health and like my own wellness, my own still being active in those self-care aspects. My therapist, when I started working with Nami, he would I still was kind of a little rocky at times, and I still am. And he'd be like, "You're a Nami poser." Like he's like, "You can't, you don't even practice what you preach." He'd call me a Nami poser. So, just that whole practicing when I preach. If I'm saying, "Hey, you need to take time for yourself," I need to make sure I do that.
Right. I mean, it's kind of saying, "Hey, like it's important for you, and it's equally as important for me." And I think that's huge. And I think that's kind of like the story, right? It's kind of saying, "Hey, like building this different relationship with yourself in this journey to kind of really start picking yourself back up and putting it together and kind of moving forward the way you want to move forward in a way that's actually like meaningful, personal. Imagine like the connection that you build with the people that you serve, especially as an RSS and an LSW with the children. I mean, that's powerful. The ability to connect, right? And I think that's kind of like a very apparent strength that you have, is that ability to kind of really understand what people are going through and what that experience is like for them. And so, no, man, I think we're kind of coming to the end here of this podcast. So, and I think you've kind of done an incredible job at talking about what you've had to do and the lengths you've had to go to make sure that, hey, non-suicidal self-injury doesn't have a hold on you anymore.
Yeah.
And
Hey,
Mark,
Justin,
yes,
I just
sir.
want to add one thing, if that's okay. So, I asked Andrew that question,
man.
and obviously, he feels the same way that I do. But I'm going to ask you another question, Andrew. Okay? And I know how I feel about it. And I think we've talked about this before. Yeah, we both made it more difficult than probably it needed to be. But okay, for you to find your purpose and your passion and pursue your education and do the work that you're doing inside the community, which is unbelievable work. Did it have to happen the way it happened with so many hospitalizations and suicide attempts?
That's a really good question. Obviously, like I can't go back in time and see what would have happened if I would have done it differently. But I think it helped shape me into who I am today. And, maybe not necessarily the clinical aspects of work, but I think the work I do as an RSS, um, there's so much that goes into that. And you're just being a mental health, I say that I'm a mental health advocate and a mental health professional. I think that there's so much stigma about so many different components, and it's just the way I looked at receiving mental health care in sixth grade, seventh grade, whatever it was, and how terrible I thought that was. I mean, I'd hide my mom's car keys before my appointments so we couldn't go, like that's how terrible I thought therapy was.
Yeah.
So I think, to be the RSS that I am today, I definitely needed to go through all that.
Yeah. And that's how I feel about my personal story too. I mean, in all honesty. I mean, yeah, it could have been easier and I made it more difficult than it needed to be, but I feel by going through the struggles that I went through, it kind of molded me and changed me, and it allowed me to find my true purpose and passion in life that that was missing, and kind of catapulted me to some of the work that I'm doing in the community, which is a fraction of what you guys are doing, but still I do feel good because compared to the old Mark doing what I'm doing now, I mean, I just feel lot better about myself, just trying to help others and, try to lead and, give them guidance and things like that. And Justin, I suspect, because you were on a podcast and you shared your story, you probably would feel the same way. That I
Absolutely.
had to have. Yeah.
And there's no other reason why I'd be here. It's kind of makes you come into contact with parts of yourself that you'd put a lot of energy and effort to try and run away from, until you gotta look and say, hey, I can't reject these parts, man. I gotta kind of accept all of me here.
Yeah.
And Mark, I don't think you should discount like the work that you do in the community, man. Like you do a different type of work that is just as valuable, and I think you impact people in your own way. I don't discount like not the work that you guys do. Like you do just as much work and just as
Imitate Mark one more time. Imitate Mark one more time.
I get it. I do.
But let's also not. You're also undercutting yourself in the fact that you've now published 2 books, Mark. So. Oh, here it is. Yeah. Oh, those things. The written word, the pages that turn, that have words on them, those things. Yeah. Mark's got 2 of them now. And so what? 2-time Amazon bestseller? Is that an appropriate title for it? Yeah. Okay. Just making sure.
It is. And I appreciate you, giving me a shout out in regards to that. But I'm just saying, you guys get all the education and all that stuff. And you live life experience, which I think is
Mark
huge.
breaks a physical sweat in the gym and breaks a mental sweat while we're
I just got the school of hard knocks, Justin. That's all.
Oh, no. So anything else before we kind of call it a night, guys?
I just want to reiterate how we kind of started the podcast. Strength and courage, right here. Strength and courage. I wore this T-shirt for Andrew because I knew some of his story, and I think he shared, obviously, some of his story tonight, and I think everybody would agree. He's a symbol of strength and courage. That's why I wore the shirt.
Thank you, Mark.
Absolutely.
More than welcome.
We'll definitely have to have you come back for part 2, Andrew. No doubt about that.
I would be honored. So I appreciate you guys having me tonight. This was something I definitely wanted to do, and was very honored to be asked by Mark to do this tonight. So I appreciate you guys. I've listened to your podcast in the past. They're solid. They're good. So I was like, I don't think I'm quite the material to go on this podcast. I was like, when I said something to Mark about it months ago, I was just kind of like shooting it out there. Like, I really didn't think he was going to let's do it, So I that means a lot to me that you, Mark, think that highly of me to, kind of put me in that kind of position. So I appreciate that.
Oh, absolutely. Mark had you bypass the open trial we have for these. So, it's great. Like, look at Mark. Mark's trying to stay stone cold. Like, just, nothing. No, I think it's fantastic. You have a message, you have a story to share, and it's obviously, a lot of wisdom that's come from these experiences that you've kind of gone through. So, appreciate you taking the time to be here. And
thank you, Justin.
These podcasts always air on the 1st and the 15th. So, the next one is going to be right before the Bears take the field. So, hopefully.
I hope so.
Rock his Caleb Williams jersey next podcast if there's a victory there.
If they're taking the field and playing in the Super Bowl, which would be the podcast drop right before the Super Bowl, you will see me in a Bears jersey. Probably an old school.
I will say I'm not a Bears fan, but I do have a Brandon Marshall jerseys, Bears and Jets actually. So he actually has borderline. So
I'd say an actual huge proponent for mental health.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I've met him twice actually. So
I got to meet him when he came and talked to one of the local hospital organizations when he was just launching.
Yeah. It was super cool. So next podcast, right? He actually signed the second time he came back to the hospital. He had just been traded to the Jets, and I bought a Jets jersey just to have him sign that. He's like, I don't even have my Jets jersey yet, and he actually signed it first Jets jersey signed. So, and then he also signed my Bears one. So the Bears one I can wear. The Jets one I gotta put up in a frame. So
that's awesome. That is awesome. Well, it's been wonderful tonight, Mark and Andrew. And everybody, thank you for tuning in wherever you are. And we will catch everybody on our next episode. Thank you all.
Thanks for joining us today on Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery. If you're on the journey to find guidance and insights, subscribe now wherever you find your podcasts. Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery is an educational resource, not a substitute for medical or therapeutic advice. The opinions expressed by the hosts and their guests are not necessarily those of NAMI DuPage. Go to namidupage.org/podcast for links to past episodes, show notes, and to submit a question or topic ideas for a future episode. Until next time, be well.